Welcome to the Ignite Podcast, where we introduce thought leaders and subject matter experts that you'll want to consider for your next corporate event. Now, here's your host, Dennis Warden.
Well, I want to welcome you to the Ignite Podcast, and I am so excited to have a good friend, and I always say that, but I feel like all of our Ignite speakers are good friends, and if they aren't at the beginning, they become good friends. And but Randy Walton's been a good friend for 20 plus years, and we've gotten to know each other. And one thing about you, Randy, I don't think I leave a meeting or a time when you've done a seminar, a workshop, or we've had lunch at the airport, that I don't leave having learned something. And I always appreciate that about you. And I've had the privilege of working with some great people in the area of leadership, but you often take it to the next level. And so I'm looking forward to our time together. So welcome, Randy Walton, to the Ignite Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Dennis. I'm excited to be here. This is great.
Well, one thing, you've said that, being a healthy leader doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good leader, but at the same time, if you're an unhealthy person, well, you're not going to be a good leader. What do you mean by that? And I mean, we're not talking about COVID type of health. What kind of health are we talking about? And explain that further.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Dennis. I think there's a principle behind this, right? And it's simply, we want to treat leadership. I think all of us have a tendency to lean this way, and it probably doesn't apply to everybody, but to treat leadership a little bit like it's a set of skills, a set of capabilities we need to develop. But I think there's something deeper and more profound in this, that it has a lot to do with who we are deeply and fundamentally. And, kind of the old expression, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And I think we have to be really careful sometimes that if we get so focused on the mechanics, we lose sight of the fact that those things that would cause another person to look at us and say, man, he's a little unhealthy, meaning maybe a little bit egotistical or self-absorbed or overly competitive or whatever, right? All these things that are born out of these things that we would look at and say, that's kind of unhealthy behavior. Well, if that's there, all of the great leadership mechanics in the world aren't going to overcome that tension. So I think leadership starts, it's this journey into yourself that you've got to deal with you first. And when that happens, now, the healthy part of you, that expression of all the things that we would look at and say, hey, you care about people, you care about encouraging and building up others and creating value in the world for your clients and all the people that you deal with, then, right, you'll gravitate towards the right tools and mechanics.
Mm-hmm. So if I am a healthy leader, and I've got a team, and we're as we discussed prior to going on. In fact, as you can see, I'm taking notes already. So, as we discussed prior to going on this call, we were talking about the fact that in both of our businesses and in virtually all businesses, a great percentage of our team leadership, our productivity is being done online, whether it's Zoom or whatever. And people are working from home. They're not actually working in the office. How do we as a leader make sure that our teams are focusing on the right thing, that they are they're being energized, getting energized, being productive, delivering the goods on time? I mean, if we took where we were October a year ago to where we are today, it's like night and day. And we as leaders have had to pivot in much of our leadership style. So how do we make sure our teams are focusing on the right thing? How do we make sure they're being productive and that we're energizing them?
Yeah. I think it's incredibly difficult right now. I don't, clearly none of us have lived through a set of circumstances like this. And so uncharted waters. But I think my observation, particularly in talking to a lot of the leaders I'm working with, is what this has done is it's taken any room for sloppiness sort of away. You know, I think there were a lot of ways that we might have had bad habits as leaders. We might have allowed a lack of clarity to creep into our business where we're not being very explicit about the goal and the outcome and the expectations in the organization. It's sort of assumed, right? We assume people kind of catch it in our presence and in our orbit. And to some degree, that's always going to be true. But now that that orbit's taken away, the responsibility that we have as a leader to be expressly clear, to say exactly what we mean, to point people in a direction towards a really clear and I think somewhat compelling objective has become that much more important, right? We can't sort of surround ourselves with this environment of, hey, we all come in and we have a good time together, and somehow we assume that sort of people catch it, right? There's the old phrase that, you know, culture is more caught than it's taught. Well, we don't have that luxury anymore, right? We have to teach culture. And I think there's, you know, my good friend Andy Stanley has an expression that I love. He says that it's certainty is less important than clarity. Right? It's an illusion. And I think if we try to offer certainty to our teams, to the people we work with today, we can't offer certainty. We don't know what the future, for example, of COVID will be and how that will affect our business climate. But I think we can offer clarity to people. And I think that responsibility to be clear, even in the face of uncertainty, is daunting for a lot of us as leaders. We're fearful. We don't want to make promises we can't keep. We don't want to try to predict a future that we may not be able to understand. And I think that for leaders, that often leads to this kind of this quietness, this sense of shutting down and isolation. We just we retreat back into these very tactical and functional things. We're just going to get busy on the business. And we miss the fact that all of the people who work for us, they're also complex beings and they have uncertainty about the future and they're worried and stressed. Sometimes for us as a leader to walk in and say, hey, I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I have a plan for what we're going to do next. And here's what I want us to accomplish. This is the outcome I hope that we can arrive at. And I don't know that we can do it, but I feel good about this as a direction. And here's the role that you play. Here's how you contribute, how you're important, no matter what your role is to the organization. And I know that sounds very simplistic. It's not a complicated idea, but it requires a real deliberate and intentional effort. I've got an organization right now. They're about a $75 million company, manufacturing company, phenomenal culture, great leaders, great people. It's all the things that you would want to do and do right in the way you build a business. They're really great. And with COVID, it's had a impact on some very downstream things for the people that they sell to, and it's had a real impact on their overall business. And so they did find themselves in a trap of just sort of like, well, we're just holding on. We're just in a waiting game. And they didn't really think it mattered. But what it was just sending a message to all the people in the organization that we don't know what we're doing and we don't know where we're going. And, you know, the difference between being a manager and organizing work is very different than being a leader, right? I always think about leadership involves a journey, right? You need to, that's the point of leading. Leading is in going somewhere. So if you're going to be a leader, you have to express that we're going somewhere. Even if you say, I don't know what that destination looks like. I just know these are some milestones. And I think if we're moving in that direction, we'll feel confident. And it's astonishing how often people, they grab onto our confidence and they grab onto your confidence as a leader. And they say, hey, I'm willing to take that risk and I'm willing to go on this journey with you because you're offering me the hopefulness that if I can take certain actions, if I can play a role in this, maybe we can do really, really well despite the discomfort and the uncertainty about the world that we're sitting in. And so that explicitness, it's really, really hard because it's sometimes out of our comfort zone as leaders. We feel like we're being dishonest.
Right. Well, one of our mutual friends, John Maxwell, often says, you know, if you're scaling the mountain, you know, and you turn around and nobody's following you, you're only taking a walk. You know, it's like, so you're talking about leadership and you're talking about people following you. And if nobody's following you, you're only taking a walk. The question is, how do you inspire people? How do you, during this time, I mean, so we're talking back and forth and we're having some good dynamic on, you know, a Zoom call and that. It's a little different than if I'm in my office, you're in your office, you come by and you sprinkle a little Randy Walton angel dust on me, and I'm inspired to take on the next, the next project, and that.
Mm-hmm.
So, because, it's really on the end of the, I'm going to use the term follower, on the end of the follower or the employee,
Mm-hmm.
it's really their choice. It's discretionary whether they receive your inspiration or they say, nice try, Randy, you've kind of given me an idea. You have some idea where we're going, but I'm still not really sure. And
Yeah.
so how do you do that inspiration? How do you do it in this type of a time that we're in?
Yeah. I've always kind of, my mental picture around this is I think of it like a lawn. You can't fix your lawn in a weekend, you have to constantly water and fertilize, and then you have to mow it and prune it, if you will, in a very precise fashion. And if you do that, you'll have this amazing and wonderful result. But it's a lot of very small, very sort of mundane habits that need to be cultivated to produce this extraordinary outcome at the end, right? You can't just go out and say, well, if I can just give that lawn the right cut, right, then I solve the problem. And I think sometimes as leaders, we get into the tension and the rigor of the business, and then all of a sudden we find there's this moment where I need to inspire people. And sometimes what we do is we just it's like this grand mal effort. We're going to show up one day and I have to say this great thing. And I think we treat this inspiration idea too much as something that happens from here, and not enough something that happens from right here. I think the most powerful inspiration happens, and it has to happen intimate and kind of one-to-one level. Now there is a component of inspiration that is motivational. It is casting vision. It's what lighthouse are we steering towards? That's very aspirational in its nature. But if you think about people who inspire you, one thing that I think is true for all of us is that a person that we don't personally respect doesn't do very much to inspire us. Even if we don't respect everything about them, there's going to be something about the nature of who they are that can inspire us. I mean, we think about entrepreneurs who are very famous in our culture today. Some of them from a personal standpoint, we might look at and say, I don't know that I want to emulate who they are, but there's an aspect of what they bring creatively or entrepreneurially that we're like, wow, that's extraordinary. And I would love to be like that. We have to cultivate that credibility through our character. And yes, our personal competence fits into that. But if I've got a sort of way on the side of where I want to err, I'm going to err towards character, towards that sense of responsibility to people. And, John Maxwell has said so often, as others have said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think we say that and it's a bit cliched now, but it's no less true or important for us to remember that. So, the work I do very often, I spend a lot of time with leaders and it's on Zoom calls. It's doing what we're doing right now. And the ability for me to jump straight into, let's talk about the issues of your business. Let's talk about the concerns that you have. Let's talk about what's happening in your market. That's an easy place for us to go. And frankly, it's a little bit more superficial, but how are you feeling about the organization right now? How are you feeling about the role that you're playing, about your leadership? It requires a deeper level of trust and intimacy. And I don't build that in the moment of crisis. I build that long before the crisis happens, right? So I've got to water that ground. I've got to spend time in all of those one-to-one things. And it is not efficient. We're busy, we're stressed, we're tired, we have a lot of things going on, and there's always a problem to capture our attention. So how do you elevate these essential but not urgent things to a place where they get your attention? Because then you have this currency, you have this relational currency you've built over time. And when urgency hits and when there's stresses and struggles, and you can go to someone and say, hey, I'm really counting on you in this moment. What you get is not the sort of stereotype of an employee who's just trading time for dollars. You get someone who's invested in that, and they want to live up to your expectations, and they want to go the extra mile to fulfill the promise of the company and the business and what you're doing, the service you provide. And so, it's all of these small things that you do that lead up to it. They're very habit-based sort of things. Well, this is kind of goes back to the first thing we talked about, right? Which is if you can't get to a place in your life where you can really care and deeply care about the success and the contribution of people that some of whom will play very important senior roles, and sometimes they play small roles that might be mundane, but they're nonetheless extraordinarily important. It'll be very hard in that moment for you to develop any kind of influence, and ultimately for that to lead to any level of inspiration. Sometimes people just need to know of the potential you have. My wife is extraordinarily good at creating followership, and what I mean by that was she's a teacher, but her leadership as a teacher went far beyond her role in the classroom. Students reaching out privately and constantly, and years later, she still has students that she meets with on a regular basis that seek her counsel. And she would tell me, she said, I really don't do too much. I just help tell people the truth about who I think they are, the best version of who they are. And we all of us can get extraordinary value from having somebody tell us the best version of who we are. And I find the same thing is true when I'm working with a CEO, and I do the same thing with a CEO, and I help them see, hey, there's this wonderful capability in you. There's this wonderful potential in you. And you can be the person that you aspire to be. And then they learn to turn around and to take that into the organization, and it gets repeated over and over and over again. People desperately want to live up to the best version of who they are and who they want to be. And it's a very simple idea, but it's very hard to do in practice. And I think when that happens, inspiration and connection and motivation, and ultimately through that discretionary effort, it can't help but follow.
I believe what I hear, Randy, is that the character of a leader is, bar none, the standard for what people are going to and how they're going to respond to you. I mean, if they say, you are a man of character, you are a woman of character, I want to follow you. But the minute you violate your character or what they perceive your character to be, you've lost influence. You've lost the ability to inspire.
I absolutely think that's true. I absolutely think that's true. I think we see example after example of that in our popular culture. And I think that it's just as true in a private sense. It is inviolable. Great character can overcome gaps in our capability, for example. That vulnerability to say, hey, I don't understand this, but I'm very committed to doing the right thing here, and I need to recruit the rest of you to help us be successful. That helps other people play a role because their competence becomes important to the success of the organization. Yeah. But you can't outsource your character to the rest of the organization. It's still your responsibility.
Love it. Our guest today on the Ignite podcast is Randy Walton. You can learn more about Randy and booking him as a speaker once we're all back on the speaking tour circuit. But go to igniteadvisorygroup.com and you'll find all the information there about Randy Walton. Just a great guy as you're learning here. I'd like a little bit of personal insight. Tell me, we're watching you, listening to you, viewing you from your office. You've got a photo behind you that's got a street. That's kind of an interesting photo. What's that all about?
Oh, thanks. I've always been a bit of an art fan, and in fact, I have two of my daughters are graphic designers, and I think it kind of runs in the family a little bit. I've never had any talent, just appreciation. But I was actually at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and there was an exhibit by Matisse and a guy named Diebenkorn, who was kind of the American Matisse. And this is a piece that he did actually in the California coast, and it was just something about it that I just thought was just really calming. And
cool.
So I got it, framed it, and it kind of is the centerpiece of my office.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the statue of the man to your left, that Will Rogers, who is that?
Yeah, that was a trophy from a golf tournament.
Oh, how did you do?
Yeah, well, we won that one, but it was a team effort, and I was the weak link. Let's just call it
that. Great. Well, you can tell by the core behind me that I found great relaxation in being in the outdoors. And and along those lines, what are you reading right now?
Oh boy. You know, it's interesting. I'm actually going back and rereading a couple of old favorites. Late by Thomas Friedman. Just, I think it's just an extraordinary perspective on a lot of these huge cultural shifts and these dynamic shifts that are happening in our world. And so that's been really fascinating, because even though it's a few years old, the thought process that goes into it is still true today. And I think it pointed to some bigger cultural trends that we're all experiencing. And I'm a huge, I love reading historical work. I just finished The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson, which is about Churchill during the bombing in London during World War II, and just extraordinary history. I love that. Just to see how leaders are bearing up under stress is always very interesting.
That's great. Well, speaking of leadership and this whole area of, especially right now, but even when things return to whatever normal looks like, but how do we often talk about accountability as leaders. How do we, right now, there is a high level degree of trust because most employees are working from home. The accountability is not where you're looking down and just observing. And so there's a lot of trust there, but how about this whole issue of accountability? Because it's difficult for us as leaders to require, let alone measure,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I love watching, I'm a big movie buff, and I really love watching movies, but I think there's this stereotype that shows up in a lot of movies of the senior leader, the executive, being a bit of a tyrant, dogmatic and sort of screaming and yelling. And accountability is not a problem for those people, right? They're going to hold you accountable regardless, and there's a bit of an evil intent in that. And I think that hasn't done us any favors as leaders, because I think we treat accountability as if it's an unkindness that comes from us, right? Like, I have to be the bad guy, right? My job to come to you, accountability by its very nature says I'm holding you accountable for something that didn't live up to expectations. And so I think we see that as a negative. But I think there's a flip side to that concept of accountability, which says accountability is also a kindness. Accountability is a statement that says, I actually believe you can do what you've been asked to do. Accountability says, I see the higher potential in you, and I'm calling you up to that higher potential. And so we talked about great cultures. People believe the best in each other. They want the best for each other, and they expect the best from each other. And believing the best in each other means that I see the best of intent in your actions. Wanting the best for you says, I actually want to see you be successful, and your success doesn't steal from me. But I expect the best from you that's where accountability comes into play. And I think when we shift in our mindset, right, when we realize that to not hold someone accountable is really implicitly saying, I didn't actually think you could do it. It's not fair for me to hold you accountable because it was too big, it was beyond your skill, your capability, whatever it might be. That's not fair. When we ask a child, we ask a 3-year-old to pick their toys up, we have a pretty moderated expectation of how successful they're going to be. We typically come in, we find them playing with them, right? And when we ask our 16-year-old to pick up their room, we have a very different set of expectations. They're very capable of doing that. Similarly, if you're new in the organization, right, it's my responsibility to know what you're capable of and to constantly sort of push you a little bit. When you think about just the concept of delegation, the reason we give work out to other people, I think we can fall into the trap of believing we do that to get more done. I've got a lot to do. I want to get more done. Let me just give that work out to everyone. But I think that leads us to then delegate to people whom we have complete confidence that they can do it because they've already done it a bunch of times, which doesn't grow anybody. But what if the bigger purpose in delegation was ultimately to develop people? Well, to do that, we have to constantly be giving things to people they've never done. Otherwise, it won't develop them. So if we're giving things to them they've never done, then we owe them feedback. we owe them clarity on, hey, you did a pretty good job there. Let's talk about where you did well. Let's talk about where you might have fallen short in expectations. And then, hey, now my conversation with you is not so much about beating you down for the things that you missed on, but it's about building you up in those areas to grow your capability. It's the reframing. It's the mental shift I have to make leader, change the way I engage with you around accountability. Not the other way around, right? It's my job to do that. Now, I will say, sometimes we don't create great accountability conversations because we failed to create actual clarity of what the expectation was on the front end. So we were vague, and then, well, any expectation of, like any accountability conversation, if I come to you and said, well, you didn't meet my expectations, and the person was like, well, I didn't know what your expectations were, then we kind of crumble because we realized it was partially our fault. So we have a duty on the front end to create very, very clear expectations. If we do that, accountability does get easier. But again, this mental shift, this coming to the realization that to not hold someone accountable is actually an unkind thing to do, is very hard.
And that, as a leader, that's something that needs to be communicated company-wide, so that, and then lived out in the way that you then call people to the right kind of accountability. It seems like most of us, well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think even you as a leader, you have to expose yourself to that same thing, right? You have to make yourself vulnerable to accountability.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, it seems like most of us bring into our marriages or bring into the workplace things from our childhood, some things from, from the bullies on the playground. We all bring things into our adult life and to the workplace, so that accountability to some means, somebody with a hammer over their head, and to others that may have been brought up in a culture like you're talking about, says, man, Randy believes in me. I'm going to show him that I can do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's a lot of people have said this, that the method is the message, right? That it's not just that you have the accountability conversations, but it's how you do it. You talk about what we bring into it. Psychologists refer to this concept of family of origin. That in my family, conflict was quick. It was pretty directed in your face, and then it was over, and it wasn't personal, and it didn't carry forward. I married if my wife were here, she'd be comfortable with me sharing this, but I married into a family where it's a lot more civil. It's a lot more polite on the surface, but people, they let their grudges kind of fester because we don't talk about them. And so when we came together in a marriage relationship, we had very different ways of dealing with each other. And so my directness seemed like harshness to her, and her maybe more passive approach to dealing with that conflict, I didn't even see it happening. I was ignorant to it. And we had to figure that out. We had to learn that. And people do that. They bring their parenting history into their work environment. They bring their last boss. They bring the coach they had in sports, right? They bring the teacher. There's all of these influences that begin to shape how we receive feedback. And, great leaders have to be a bit of a psychologist, right? You have to start to discern who needs it straight and who needs it more gently, to understand that feedback is really, really important. A passive way to do that. But having said that, I also think that there's a direct and firm, but also kind and caring way to do it that is probably the best way to sort of straddle that line between being very soft and gentle. Is, hey, I absolutely believe in your capability to be successful. You didn't meet standards and expectations, and to be very unequivocal about that. It's not something that I think most of us want to have to spend the time to do that, because it just feels like, hey, we're running 100 miles an hour and this needs to be quick. I need to let you know, I need to move on. I will tell you, most of the leaders I deal with, it's not a problem of over directness. It's a problem of lacking.
Yeah. Well, we're really talking about human behavior here. And you're very strong in the area of believing in the importance of one's, personal values, one's, deep beliefs. And how do those play into your role as a leader?
I think it's such an interesting idea, right? I have to be careful. I don't want to get too theoretical here, but what we believe is what drives, or what we value. And when I say value, I don't mean like our moral values, like, don't kill people. We would assume everybody shares those values. We'd hope that everybody shared that value, right? I mean more like choice values, like, is family important or is career important? I don't know. It depends on where you are in your life. It depends on who you are. It depends on a lot of things. And your choice and my choice might be different, and it doesn't make either one of us wrong. But it's going to make it much harder for us to really connect. If I love soccer and you love football, and we get together to talk about the game, and we have, I don't really care about football, I'm all about soccer. Well, it's not that one of us is wrong, but it's hard for us to meet there. If I care about civility and kindness, if I care about being gentle with people's feelings, and you care about being direct, not because you believe it's unkind, but because you want to be honest, right? We both might see ourselves as being kind, but in very, very different ways, because we value different things. And so it's going to manifest itself in different behavior. So if we really want to help shape the way our organization thinks, we have to encourage people to begin to adopt and understand what we value, much more than how we want them to behave. I can control behavior if I need to. It's exhausting and time consuming, and the people being controlled don't like it. And frankly, I don't like the controlling, but it does work for a while. And eventually people decide they don't like to be controlled. So we think, okay, well, if I can just educate you, if I can just explain to you the motivation behind this, that will help. And it does work to some degree, but there's things that you and I both know really, really well that we don't do. We stay up too late. We don't get enough sleep. We know what healthy diets look like, but we don't eat the right foods. Well, why? It's not because of knowledge. It's not because of understanding. It's because, hey, I don't always eat as healthy as I ought to, because for me, food is a reward. It's gratification. It's a way that I connect socially with other people. I mean, all of these things. Food means a lot more than just nutrition. And therefore, I'm motivated to treat it differently. Similarly, when we have a team working in our organization, if they value a great customer experience, right, they'll figure out behaviors that might not be exactly our behaviors, but they'll figure out behaviors that get them a lot closer to the target than if they value, I just want the problem to go away, and no problems is success for me. And we have to discern that. So values are incredibly important, and we have to spend a lot of time really helping people to reframe their understanding of their values, or what they believe to be important. Because if we can get people to embrace and adopt what's valuable to us as a leader, they will at least the broad strokes of what they do, they'll get it right, and they'll seek the information to perfect that over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm still trying to, I want to make the connection, or help me make the connection between, especially between beliefs, but, and there are those core values that all of us bring into, whether it's integrity or, whatever we bring in, that, as we mentioned earlier, can be, with one dumb move can be lost, and take, if ever, come back, as far as one of your, Dennis, you're known as a man of integrity, and then you blow it. Well, it's going to be a long time before anybody ever says that again, right? So, but these core beliefs as a leader, living those out is really challenging, especially in this, I think, in this day and time when there's so much, question about leadership, and so much question about, whether is he or she in this for themselves, or, and at the end of the day, people need to know, like you have said already, but they need to know that you are who you say you are.
Right. Dennis, have you ever had a person treat you badly in a professional context?
Sure.
Yeah, I think we've all had that. I've certainly had that. And in those moments, it's very easy for us to apply what we would call intent to their behavior. You lied to me because you're a dishonest person. You stole that account from me. You you yelled at me, you whatever, but we always apply this kind of negative intent. But I've never talked to someone who said to me in a very honest conversation, oh, I acted very badly towards that other person because I'm a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're all the hero in our story. We're always the person operating. Now I might behave badly. I might be harsh with you, but I was harsh with you because I felt like I was protecting something that was important. It might be me, or it might be a principle, but whatever it is, I can be impatient with you because I feel that you are violating something. So we make those trade-off choices all the time. As leaders, we decide that our bad behavior is justified by our good intent. But for the person on the other side of that experience, it's just bad behavior. They can't read our intent. They're going to apply motive to us that's a bad motive. I've had that happen. I've had an employee say to me, well, you did that because you just think you're smarter than everyone. And I thought, I don't think that at all, but I don't know how to prove that to you at this point. I'm kind of stuck. And I think that for us, part of what we have to do is we have to learn to reframe our experiences. That employee didn't fail to hit the deadline because they think they're a bad employee. Something else is going on, and I need to be able to see the best in them. I have to say, were you afraid? Were you paralyzed with uncertainty about what to do? Are you overwhelmed? Are you not just invested in this, right? If I failed to connect the dots for you so that you feel that you have a role here and that this is a great place for you to be successful. And yeah, sometimes the hard truth of that is that if people don't line up in those ways, they might need to find another place. They might need to find a place where they can have that connection, where they can really be energized by their work. But I think more often than not, the challenge that we have is that we have a chance to help reframe people's understanding of what they're doing. And when we do that, when we help them understand that we do believe the best in them, when we help them understand that that even if we've acted badly, that it was an honest mistake because our intent was positive, and that we see the same in them, we'll go a long way towards mitigating some of the noise and the energy and the distraction that gets in the way of the things that we're trying to do. But that's part of the responsibility of leadership, is to reframe our perspective on our hardships.
That's great. I was sitting here thinking, as you were saying that, just the importance of having somebody like you, or somebody like a personal coach, or having somebody on your team that will speak truth to you as a leader. It's because we do, believe our own press clippings that we've written ourselves, but it's, but for somebody to be able to point that out is so helpful. But too many leaders surround themselves with, as they become more powerful, they surround themselves with people that play into this persona that they've created. So it's important.
Well, I think you just said something really important too. I think a lot of very successful leaders, right, they're typically in a place where they have more autonomy in terms of choosing the people that will be on their teams. And I don't gravitate to people who agree with me because I want yes men. I gravitate to people who agree with me because I think they might be right, since they agree with me. Because I naturally think I'm right. I naturally think I have the right perspective. And so for me to gravitate to someone who is got a different view and a different perspective is very, very challenging. So we'll hear that sort of stereotype of the leader that surrounds themselves with the quote yes men sort of stereotype, right? And we want to almost treat it as if they choose to do that, but it's a pretty natural progression. We're looking for, we want unity. We want alignment of interest. We want people who care about what we care about. And so the people who agree with us care about what we care about. And I think that's great for us to do that, but then we have to have that dose of reality. We have to understand that that does put us in a position where we can all sit around. And I heard years ago that a giraffe is a horse put together by a committee because we don't want to agree with each other. So we're all like, oh yeah, well, if the horse was taller, that would be so much greater. And it was something that doesn't solve the problem that we were trying to solve. And I think we just have to hold on to this idea that we have to architect sort of an honesty in exchange with other people, and we have to recognize sort of these things that we are prone to. That's where outside counsel becomes very useful for people, because it is somebody that own any land, so to speak, where you live, so they don't have the same things to defend.
Yeah. Well, our guest today on the Ignite podcast has been Randy Walton, and Randy, I mean, you do consulting and speaking both here across the U.S. and internationally, and we've connected sometimes when you're on your way to the UK or various parts of the world, but do a lot in the area of consulting businesses and business leadership, and of course on the speaking side as well. What's a win for you when you're getting on the plane on Thursday this week and making a flight up to meet with a company, and you leave your home, you fly up, you do your deal for 2 days, you fly home. What's a win? What says, that was a good trip, that was worthwhile, I made this difference? Or what's a win for you when you work with a client, whether it's speaking or consulting?
That's an easy one for me to answer, because it's really kind of the fuel that I feel like I live on a little bit. I love seeing leaders have that aha moment, right? Not because of something that necessarily I said or did, but I love when you see people sort of have these breakthrough moments where they all of a sudden, it really clicks in a deep and visceral way for them. Like, I can do this. I can do something different. I can take us in a different direction. I can lead in a different way. And when you see that happen, that's permanent. That's not just, something nice that's optically, satisfying, or everybody was happy in the room and rah, rah. You're different on the other side of that experience. And when leaders that I'm working with have those aha moments, and they all of a sudden, now they see the world differently, and they act and lead differently, and they're starting to see it replicated in their teams and in their people. That absolutely, that's the greatest thing in the world for me. It makes me feel like I'm really living out my purpose.
Yeah, that's great. And there's nothing like laying your head down on the pillow at night and knowing that to the best of your ability, you fulfilled your purpose. And that's awesome.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you, Randy, for being our guest today on the Ignite podcast. I encourage our listeners and viewers to go to igniteadvisorygroup.com, and you'll see the URL here at the close of the podcast. But learn more about Randy, book him to come in to speak, if not in person, by Zoom. And if not by Zoom or by coming in to speak, to certainly do consulting work with your company. But I highly recommend a good friend and a great leader himself, Randy Walton. Randy, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dennis. I love what you're doing here, so appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you much.